Can I get a mic or a mic and a half? That the source owe me. Shout out to the editor staff. Yeah, I'm all grown, so much better with math. I need a spread in the Forbes, taking the Benjamin bath. Yeah, I'm serving this track like Steffi Graf. Yeah, Roger Federer, there's no competitor.
Urban Tennis, Episode 11, Istanbul, not Constantinople. Welcome back, everyone, to the Urban Tennis Podcast. I'm your host, joined by my co-host.
How do you do?
Fantastic. We're back this week with our podcast covering the events in Istanbul as we head to the final weekend. We'll be looking at the comments Victoria Azarenka made about mental fatigue. We'll look ahead to next week's Paris Masters at the draw and what happened last year and why that may be significant. And a little fun segment on tennis nicknames, plus our favorite games, the social media highlight of the week, and our special outro song. So if you're ready, let's get started with episode 11. This week, the WTA gathered for their final WTA Championships in Istanbul before moving to Singapore next year. And the script has gone fairly to script, I think. Serena Williams has dominated the red group, going 3-0. And Petra Kvitova is the other semifinalist, which makes sense because she's one of the hotter players on tour. And in the white group, Li Na has been the class of the group, going 3-0. And Jelena Jankovic, who's returning to this tournament after a couple years away, is the other semifinalist and will now face Serena Williams. So knowing that, I go over to my co-host. What has really stood out for you so far in Istanbul?
Well, I think one thing that's really stood out for me is kind of a little bit off the court, but related to an on-court performance, is Li Na with her comments, saying that she feels that how she's playing right now is better than she played in 2011. 2011 being, of course, the year she won the French Open. So I find that interesting that she can make that assumption based on how well she thinks she's playing. But to a point, I agree with her. I think a lot of times winning a tennis tournament, there's a lot of control. You do control your ground strokes. You do control how you serve. But like a lot of times, it's how your other players are playing around you. Right now, we're seeing a player like Serena Williams playing probably a very amazing year, barring Wimbledon, of course. So it's hard for her to have that sort of breakthrough that she had in 2011, in 2013 again, right? Because we're seeing a different level of play from players like Serena Williams and even Jelena Jankovic, like we mentioned before, having such a great resurgence. So I can believe her when she says she's having a better year than 2011, and I'll have to take her word for it.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Li Na is now actually one win away. If she does win the semifinals and make it to the final, she'll be ranked world number 3 for the first time. So the results are there for her. And I think it's a great point that in her 2011, that French Open field was really void of any, upper-class talent, the talent we look at right now. But this year, Li Na's gone deep into tournaments, even though it may be semifinals and finals, and she's not winning these tournaments, but it's against stronger fields, and that has kind of seen her play rise, and that at 31 now, she's even more mature than when she was a couple of years ago, and I think you can suggest that she is a better player, right? She might not ever win a Grand Slam again, but she has proven this year that 2011 wasn't some sort of aberration for her. I tend to agree. Li Na has been a great surprise. I think Serena, what she did against Kvitova was devastating. I really liked what Kvitova was doing coming into the match, but Serena's serve of that match was absolutely spot on, and it was something, I think Kvitova actually laughed, like, do the indoor conditions help you against Serena? And she kind of shrugged it off like, I had indoor conditions, and I was absolutely no contest today. But those have been the successes. So let's move on to maybe the disappointments. Agnieszka Radwanska, who was the number 3 seed here, lost both her matches. She was quickly put out. And Victoria Azarenka, who was the highest seed in the white group, but she was 1 and 2 and will not advance. She has some other problems that we'll talk about later. But who do you think was more disappointing in Istanbul?
I think you have to say Radwanska. I think especially because you have a different format when you're playing in the WTA Championships, right? You can't say, oh, it was just one bad match or just a bad day. When you're playing on round robin, you're having a bad week overall. So you have to be it's all on you if you're playing a bad tournament. I mean, sure, you may have some injury problems, you may not be mentally there, but if you're there ready to play tennis, it's up to you whether you can play or not, right? So I'm gonna say Radwanska.
Yeah, I think Radwanska too. Like, I've always liked Radwanska's game because of the variety and just basically unpredictability she has. She does not seem deterred even against the big players. But she seemed overmatched this week. She had two difficult lefties in Kerber and Kvitova, and obviously the matchup with Serena. But I don't know if it's the draw that hurt her or it was her play, because I think Azarenka's had a fairly down fall in general post-US Open. At Radwanska, I thought she could maybe possibly contend. I had picked Kvitova over Radwanska, but I thought it'd be much closer. So I think she's definitely the more disappointing player so far in Istanbul. Speaking of Azarenka.
Yeah, so when we're talking about Azarenka, what about that gutsy effort she had? I mean, we have talked about she also facing some issues. We did mention it before. And she did look clearly injured against Li Na. So do you think the argument that, okay, it's just mental fatigue, a little bit of bumps and bruises, still has merit? Or is it a bit tiresome at this point? Is Azarenka really just having a bad year overall and not just a bad year because of certain issues?
Well, I think her year's been good. I think bad end of the year is more point. But I think to provide context was that earlier after her loss to Yelena, she talked about that since the start of 2012, she's had a really intense 2 years, basically aligned with her emergence since winning the 2012 Aussie Open and when she really became a top flight player, and that she's really suffering from a lot of mental fatigue. And she talked about that was an issue, but now, is it merit or is it tiresome? I think it's a bit of both. I can understand where it's a little bit merit with Azarenka because, before 2012, she would not have gone through, I guess, the pressures of being a Grand Slam favorite, having to defend a Grand Slam. That's a different kind of pressure altogether. And having not faced that, I could see where that it does take a mental strain. But then I also don't think that argument should be a crux for any other player. Like if a Maria Sharapova said that, she's been in the spotlight for 10 years now. So I don't think mental fatigue and not being prepared for what the tennis schedule is, it's a 10, 11 month grind. And I think a player has to be able to, be one prepared for that and then find ways to, alleviate any of that mental stress. There's months in between the season. Like Roger Federer has gone away. Andy Murray's gone away. There's periods in the season where you can kind of get away from the game. And that's where a player really has to maximize that to avoid that mental anguish at the end of the year.
Oh, yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, you just have to accept the fact that the tennis schedule is very brutal. I mean, I think a lot of times we don't really recognize that because a lot of times you don't really get to see the entire tennis schedule play out every single week, right? So you may not get access to one tournament 1 week, another tournament another week, right? But these players are still out there playing, so you still have to use those gaps that are actually there and use those gaps wisely to whether you just need rest, whether you need more training, whether you need more, whether you need to play more tennis to actually get your game back on. Everyone has a different way of getting back on track. She needs to find that way after this bad end of the year, which I should have said before.
Exactly, and it's still a good year for Azarenka. She'll end the year number 2. Hopefully, at the beginning of 2014, she's back to her original spirits. Moving on, next week is the last of the 9 Master Series events in Paris-Bercy, the indoor venue in Paris. Looking back, this has been probably the most unpredictable of the Master Series events. I was just looking at the stats earlier today, and that we haven't had a repeat champion at this Masters event since Marat Safin in the early 2000s. So I think there's something like 8 different champions in the last 8 years. So looking back at the 2012 edition, we had, I guess, consistent with the storyline, a surprise kind of final. David Ferrer won his first Master Series event over Jerzy Janowicz, who was making his first ATP final, first ATP 1000 final, and basically kicked off his breakthrough year, or breakthrough 12 months, where he's risen to a top 15 player. So 1 year onwards, how do we assess what David Ferrer has taken from his first Masters Series event and what Jerzy Janowicz has done from his finals experience?
Well, I think Ferrer's answer is pretty obvious. It's clear that when it comes to Grand Slam time this entire year, he's ready. He's there to compete. He'd probably get to the semis, and he got to the final of the French Open, right? So he's deadly in the Grand Slams, but like outside of that, not as much success. He hasn't made it to a final or even a semifinal, maybe even a Masters Series event. So not really the threat that his ranking would suggest in such tournaments.
Yeah, I tend to agree. He's backed into now the number 3 ranking with Murray's back injury, but he has not played up to that ranking at all. You would have thought after the Paris breakthrough, even though it was a field that did not include Nadal, did not include Federer, I believe, last year. But it was something, he's not stepped up his game. Maybe that's too much to ask for him right now, but he's not been that threat. He's not sweeping all the ATP 500s like he was doing in previous years. He's not going deep in the ATP 1000s. He's been pretty consistent in Grand Slams. In terms of Jerzy Janowicz, I think that breakthrough in Paris has been huge for him, along with the Wimbledon semifinal appearance. He's somebody, if he can stay healthy, and he wasn't healthy in the summer, is very, very deadly going forward. He may not be the most consistent player, and that may be something that's just intricate to him right now, but he's somebody who poses a lot of real threats to a lot of different players, and I think his experience here has really helped him in the next 12 months on tour.
Yeah, there's nothing more I can add than that. I mean, Jerzy's a great story. I mean, we had that I think it was last year at the BNP Paribas Masters in Paris that he revealed that he was living in his car like just in the past year to try to get to that point. So to see him doing well is definitely great, and we like that here at the Urban Tennis Network.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the 2013 draw for the BNP Paribas Masters in Paris-Bercy. More will be talked about on the blog, so feel free to read along. But we have Rafa Nadal's the number 1 seed this year. He's going to be in a quarter with Tsonga and Gasquet, so that'll be interesting. On their half of the draw is David Ferrer and Tomas Berdych. Milos Raonic is also on that side. On the other half, we have a quarter with Federer and Delpo, who might be actually facing each other in Basel just this weekend. And then Stan the Man and Novak complete the other side. So initial thoughts of the draw.
Well, the first one I'd like to bring note to, which I think my host first pointed out, was the Tsonga-Gasquet match. That could potentially happen. That could be interesting if you really like that run up to London for the ATP finals, because whoever wins that match will probably clinch their spot in that final. So that's always fun when you put a little bit of extra stakes beyond the actual tournament in a match when you get into rankings and future tournaments, right?
Yeah, I think outside of Raonic, that Tsonga Gasquet may be the decider who gets into that final spot. But I'll be looking at the other side. I think Djokovic is clearly the favorite once again in this Masters Series event. Nadal, it's a long year for Nadal. It won't be surprising if he wins, but I'm not going to peg him as a favorite. A possible matchup with Wawrinka, that should be very exciting. But I also look towards Delpo and Federer, who are kind of always being drawn together and play tournaments. Like they were in Rotterdam together, they're in Basel this week, so a possibility of that this week. And looking forward to maybe another unpredictable champion, somebody who we've not seen before, and that could be Nadal, because Nadal has not won Paris, and he's still going for that 6th in 1 year, so that might be that extra motivation.
Yeah, and just as a little aside, I really hope that ATP Fantasy website works for me so I can finally get my picks in. Okay? Yeah, so moving on, we're gonna step back a little bit, talk about Basel this week. We had a career first this week. We had Federer facing off, also known as Fed, facing off against Baby Fed, also known as Grigor Dimitrov. So, do you think a younger player like Dimitrov has really earned this nickname? And what do you think a player has to do to really earn a nickname in this tennis day and age?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because I think a lot of times a nickname is pre-assumed on a player, especially in Dimitrov's case, just because his abilities and his demeanor look like Federer's. He's been called Baby Fed since he was very, very young. And the first matchup, that's why people are so excited about this first matchup. But I think in this era of nicknames, I think a nickname definitely has to be put really fast. So whether it be that, the player themselves, their coach, some sort of, pundit puts it on them. Like I specifically look at Brad Gilbert, who's just throwing out nickname after nickname, and some of them stick, some of them don't stick. So I think you got to really put something on that somebody. A lot of times it's just a iteration of their name, Rafa, Nole, but more of the adventurous ones. You got to put it on that person, see if it sticks, and eventually, if they become successful, then the nickname will stick. Otherwise, nobody's going to remember a really ill-forwarded nickname in the future.
So pretty much you're saying that it's a theory like picking the last place team to win the championship, and if it sticks, you'll get credit for it. If it doesn't, it's okay. Nobody will hold it against you, right?
Exactly. But quickly, what do you think of the current state of tennis nicknames? You're a fan of the current state, or do you think they're not original enough?
Some of them, I think, I mind that. I actually like that they're not that far from the actual name. Like, I like Delpo. Like, it's very straight to the point. I know you're talking about Del Potro. Other than that, I wish Andy Murray had a better solid nickname. Like, it seems like he has 4 or 5 that are just rolling off his thing. So, other than that, Fed's a good nickname. I also like the Swiss Knight, which isn't used as much, but it's a really great nickname. Other than that, yeah, I can't really add much to nicknames.
Yeah, I agree. And I think players have so much control now just because of their social media accounts. Vika has basically created Vika because she puts it on everything she has, her Instagram or something. Nole the same, right? So players really have a lot of control, more so than maybe in the past they did. Okay, we're almost done at episode 11, but before we finish, we'd like to finish with some favorite games on the podcast. This week, a game of volleys where we'll have 2 situations, a this or a that, and each of us will choose one, maybe the same, and give our rationale to it. So, volley number 1. For the year-end championships, do we want round robin or single elimination?
I'm going to say round robin, because round robin means that you can still have your week-long tournament, and still limit the amount of players that get into it. You want to make this a test for the entire season that they spend on the WTA, they spend on the ATP, to get to that point to have to play in a round robin. Because if it was single elimination, then the tournament would be 3 days at most. With a round robin, you can still have a week-long tournament at the O2 at Istanbul.
I think a round robin works in principle, but I'm going to choose single elimination because, this year we had Sarah Rani, who's not competitive at all. Maybe expand the field to 12, give a couple of buys, start on a Wednesday, and have single elimination. It seems more natural, and it seems you could avoid, a couple of the worst players sticking around for a while.
All right. And then our next challenge, we know that Paris and now London, they both host important tournaments outside of their Grand Slam. Of course, with Paris, the BNP Paribas, and London now with this ATP World Final. So, which city do you think is more likely to host another major tournament? New York City or Melbourne?
I don't know about likely because I think they're both likely, but deserve, I think New York City. I know I miss when the WTA Championships were in New York City. I think it has a better indoor venue that you can have something later in the year. And I feel it has more, big time feel or glitz, celebrityness when you play in New York.
Well, I think I'm going to switch up. I think I'm going to say Melbourne instead, because I think New York already has that end of tournament. The U.S. Open is kind of the last Grand Slam of the year anyway, and putting a tournament a couple of months later would be kind of cutting it a little bit too close. I would say New York if you want to do an earlier tournament, but if you still want to keep it in the same schedule after the U.S. Open, I say Melbourne.
Okay. We were speaking about Dimitrov earlier. He won his first ATP title last week. So we ask, who's more important to Dimitrov for taking that next step? His newly appointed coach, Roger Rashid, or his girlfriend, Maria Sharapova?
I'm going to take the more unconventional answer. I'm going to say Maria Sharapova, because I think just the fact that when you're with Maria Sharapova, it feels like you're in the tennis big time more than it is when you're just Grigor Dimitrov, right? Because it feels like you're getting the attention, you're getting the looks because people know who you are. Casual fans will know who you are because you're dating Maria Sharapova.
I'm going to go with Rashid because I think he's a great coaching talent. He's worked with Leighton Hewitt, working with Tsonga now. I think he'll provide the stability, and I think Sharapova is definitely going to help too, but I'm going to pick Rashid.
All right, and then that concludes volleys for this episode, and we're going to move on to our social media highlight of the week, and the host of Urban Tennis Network will cover it for you right now.
This week, we're going to look at Tomas Berdyk's Instagram page. Tomas Berdych is one of the better top 10 players on the social media sphere. He landed in Paris after his early loss this week, and he was basically pimping his watch, pimping his arrival in Paris, but it all seemed fun and everything. You know, he had a watch in front of another watch in Paris. It was almost like shameless promotion of his own brands without seeming very shameless. So, voila. Congratulations, Tomas Berdych. You earned the social media highlight of the week. That's the end of episode 11, Istanbul, not Constantinople. That song I actually discovered on Bunheads. Rest in peace, Bunheads. So we'll link to where I found that song out, and that would also be our special outro song. So thanks for listening. Episode 11, Istanbul, not Constantinople.
Constantinople, now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople, been a long time gone. Constantinople, now it's Turkish delight on a moonlit night. Every gal in Constantinople lives in Istanbul, not Constantinople. So if you've a date in Constantinople, she'll be waiting in Istanbul. Even old New York was once New Amsterdam. Why they changed it, I can't say. People just liked it better that way. So take me back to Constantinople. No, you can't go back to Constantinople. Been a long time gone. Constantinople, why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the church.